Hello and welcome to the fifth part of this webcast lecture about Karl Marx. We ended part 4 by discussing Marx's definition of socialism as the social ownership of the means of production, either by worker cooperatives or by the state. The state would, in a socialist society, serve the purposes of the proletarian class, and the state would be used to own the means of production. The purpose of this is purely political, to wage class war or class struggle against the bourgeoisie. Without their ownership of the means of production, the bourgeoisie are nothing. They are no longer a historical force and simply disappear. Ultimately, Marx thought that the socialist state would then wither away. It's only there to wage this class struggle against the bourgeoisie once the bourgeoisie no longer exist. Increasingly, the state would be not a significant factor in people's lives. It would wither away. It would become, as he puts it in Das Kapital, the administration of things rather than people. Ultimately, the end game he sees as communism. So socialism he sees as a transitional phase towards the ultimate goal of history, which is communism. Communism is very, very similar to Kant's idea of the kingdom of ends, where everybody is treated as an end in their own right and not as a means to an end. So there would be nothing like employment or exploitation in economic terms in communism. It's also very like Hegel's idea of a perfect organic society, where there's no need for laws because everybody will always act in a way which is consistent with the good of all. So that's communism. But again, for Marx, difficult though this might be to believe, communism is not a utopian abstract idea or a principle to be aspired to. It's a realistic and in fact necessary goal of the historic processes he's been studying. So socialism and communism are very different. Socialism is only a transitional phase where the state abolishes the bourgeoisie. It will gradually fade away as worker cooperatives, other forms of communal organisation, self-governing communal organisation, of housing, of transport, of distribution and education. So housing estates or areas of housing would simply be run and administered by the people living in those houses, etc. All of that would be going on in socialism as he sees it. The fact that real socialism, when it came to be in the Soviet Union, was a terrible authoritarian nightmare is an interesting problem, but nevertheless, in the work of Marx, socialism is this transitional phase where the state steadily withers away and is replaced by communism. Communism is, and that would be the main difference. So communism and socialism are very different. Communism is characterized by there being no state at all. Communism is also, Marx thinks, very like the state of nature. We've discussed that before. It's a big theme in political philosophy. What is the state of nature? What were people like before the state existed? In other words, in prehistoric times, cavemen, if you like. Now, Marx is very much like Rousseau in this respect. He thinks that state of nature, which he calls primitive communism, people were essentially happy, as it were. It's nothing like Thomas Hobbes' idea of the continuous war of all against all. Marx calls Hobbes' view of the war of all against all, so you need a necessary state and police force and authoritarian rules. He calls that the atomic theory of bourgeois society, where, like in Smith's idea of the hidden hand of the market, everyone's competing with each other. Marx and Engels, who wrote more extensively about this, thought that prehistoric society was more likely to be characterized by cooperation of various sorts. And unlike Thomas Hobbes, Marx and Engels did have access to some data, to some empirical information, because anthropology in the 19th century had discovered and was beginning to systematically discover such Stone Age societies as still existed around the world, such as in Borneo and also in North America. When we think of the North American Indians, we think of the Plains Indians who were nomads and lived in teepees, but there were others who lived in settled communities of long houses. And these long houses were actually rather characteristic of real Stone Age society that could be observed. And in these long houses, the system of social organisation is very like communism. There's no There's personal, people have personal property, but they don't have private property. That the agriculture, the fields, the productive things that they have, rudimentary ploughs or whatever, are seen as communal property, and nobody would dream of owning the plough that was associated with the longhouse and kind of charging people to use it. So Marx's idea is that human nature is communist, that prehistoric society before the state was communist, and therefore the communism he's talking about is a higher form of communism. And in very, very Hegelian terms, what's happened here is that in the beginning mankind was communist. It went through this period of alienation, of war and conflict and class division, and ultimately man is reunited with its nature in higher communism. And how this is achieved is because of the political self-awareness of the proletariat, which becomes the universal class, the class in the struggle of bourgeois society that ultimately encompasses everybody, because the dynamics of capitalist society towards monopoly, towards merger of companies, is to ensure that everybody ends up in the proletariat, everybody ends up really owning nothing of the means of production and dependent on selling their labour power. So capitalism has revolutionized feudal society, abolished its class divisions. Capitalism is a tremendously powerful, positive, historical, revolutionary force for Marx, because it creates the proletariat, and the proletariat is the whole of humanity without any class divisions. And this class, once they realise who they are, will be capable of leading a proletarian revolution. And this will happen on a worldwide basis with no further divisions of class, no divisions of nationality. And the proletariat will become self-consciously the whole human race and will re-inaugurate the kingdom of ends, the organic society, rebuild the Garden of Eden on Earth.